And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got? Policy and markets, elections, current events. The broadcast master tells us how to win. I said, policy and markets, elections and current events. The broadcast master shows.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. A crazy week already. Welcome to the program. Good to be with you. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, once again bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us on this Monday, July 27th, the last week of July. Good to be with you. Please, if you have not done so already, I want to remind you, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And also, of course, like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, and log on to jimmyatthecrossroads.com, which is all the videos, my articles, and so much more. Plus, be sure to check out, like, subscribe, follow all those good things to our friends at the Washington Examiner on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and of course at WashingtonExaminer.com. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here today. We've got a big week coming up for the show, and I am pleased to kick it off here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with the host of the Conservative Daily Podcast on all your podcast apps and, of course, on YouTube and Facebook, Conservative Daily Podcast, and also the Advocacy Director at conservative-daily.com. Max McGuire rejoins us to talk about some of the craziness that we have been seeing. Goodness knows, times have been pretty interesting these days. Max, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you, too. Last time, I don't think things were quite this hazy, quite this crazy. Let me just ask a broad question first. I mean, you've been following what's happening here in Denver, Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from. You've been following all the different things going on across the country, Seattle, Portland. What are you noticing about the chaos that's enveloped this country?
Well, I'm noticing that I haven't seen a peaceful protester in a long time. I haven't heard George Floyd's name be mentioned in a long time. These protests aren't about George Floyd anymore. That's plainly obvious to anyone who's watching. And they're not really peaceful anymore either. I mean, you talked about on your show about the pro-police rally in Denver. I wasn't there. I used to live in Denver. I knew a bunch of people there. It was chaos, right? They do this every year for 6 years in support of law enforcement. And all of a sudden, these Antifa Marxist thugs just storm in and start beating them. And the police issued a stand down order. It's a mess, right? So the big takeaway is that the peaceful protests are gone, right? I'm sure there's still some people out there who consider themselves peaceful protesters, but unfortunately, those are being completely overshadowed by the protesters who are there just to do violence. I mean, Jimmy, over the weekend, we've seen, I think it's 3 or 4 states where the peaceful protesters have opened fire or pointed guns at people. This is getting out of hand. It is getting crazy. And the cold civil war that we've been living through over the past couple of years, which, make no mistake, that's what it was, right? The country, the political scientists all agree the country is more divided than at any point since the Civil War. We have been living through a cold civil war. That cold civil war is starting to heat up. It's terrible to see, but it's happening right in front of our eyes.
Police backers.
Now, when you say cold civil war and heating up now, what do you mean by heating up in terms of a civil war? Like, imagine this civil war, play it out for a moment, because it's not going to be North versus South, a coalition of states coming together. What do you mean?
Well, all that needs to happen for there to be a civil war, or for there to be 2 sides within the same country or the same state literally fighting each other. I mean, we are at a crossroads in our country right now where I've never seen this, right? You and I have never seen this, where people are out peacefully protesting and they get beaten with clubs, beaten with sticks, get shot at just for driving down the road, like what we saw happen in Aurora on I-225 over the weekend, right? The protesters have no right to march down a federal highway, right? And they shot at a Jeep that was driving down the road. Jeep had the right of way, right? You're seeing them actually shooting at people for daring to resist their movement. I mean, to say that the cold civil war is getting hot, the fact that there are now gunshots ringing out at these peaceful protests, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, Max, one thing to keep in mind about the kind of situation in Aurora, Colorado. So we'll put up some footage in just a moment of what happened in Aurora over the weekend. That's actually where I live in Colorado. It's the 3rd largest city in the state.
Yeah.
I think it was earlier in the day, the Ethiopian community had a permitted march that was actually, the police were there, was on the road, I think on the highway, that they had actually gotten some sort of permitted process where the police were aware, they were helping them, providing them with some kind of an escort. We never see that for these protests in the street, Max.
No, you don't. And the reason for that is because these people have been allowed to get away with this for far too long, right? It started in places like New York and Minnesota and California, where they were allowed to just do whatever they wanted without any repercussions, without any law enforcement action. Law enforcement officers were ordered to stand down. So these people have been emboldened. They actually feel like their cause is just and that nothing can stop them from doing whatever they want. Right? When you're marching down an interstate without a permit, you do not have the right of way. And if a car wants to drive through that, I mean, the Jeep didn't hit anyone from what I saw. The Jeep was just driving down the interstate, right? I mean, it's incredible. You see what's going on in Portland, where they've been allowed to riot for going on 60 days, 60 nights straight. And when federal officers come in, they're so shocked at actually being arrested that they don't even call them arrests. They're calling them kidnappings and abductions. Right? They're so brainwashed into thinking that their cause is just and that they can't be prosecuted or punished, that they're actually trying to classify the federal law enforcement actions enforcing federal law to be like secret police disappearing people, like you would see in Latin America in the 70s and 80s, right? It's just not true. But the reason they're able to get away with that is because no one has ever stood up to them up until this point. They've been allowed to loot, riot, pillage. They've been allowed to do whatever they want. Right. Just last week, they reported in Minneapolis that one of the stores that was burned down, they found a body inside. A guy was burned alive by the mob. Right. Like this is getting out of hand. And if they had stopped it when President Trump told them to stop it, we never would have gotten to this point. But they've allowed them to keep going and going and going.
I want to go to cut 8 here, Max McGuire, which is video of over the weekend in Aurora, Colorado. And tomorrow we're going to be speaking with the mayor of Aurora, Mike Kaufman, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads and get his take on all the things that have been going on in the city. But one of the incidents, you referenced it before, let's show up cut 8. This one is a Jeep sort of seemingly racing through this protest on Interstate 225. going through Aurora, Colorado. And you can see, this is the aerial footage from a helicopter, that you've got the crowds on taking up both sides of the highway. And then they're splitting aside as they hear and see this car, which already, it appears, has a damaged tire. We'll show that in just a moment here. But you're noticing that he's moving through the interstate. And in just a moment here, you will see as well him stop when he sees a police car, kind of seeking out, I want to talk to the police, and was entirely, they get out of the car. You'll see in just a moment, they get out of the car once they reach a police vehicle, and then they have a conversation with the police. The car is impounded, but as of now, those guys have not been arrested, and in fact, they're actually looking for the suspect who fired at the vehicle and shot 2 other protesters. Max, go ahead.
Yeah, amazing how that works, right? I mean, the news media is saying that this Jeep, was speeding through the protests. No, this car was going what looks like the speed limit on a federal interstate. I mean, the speed limit on that road is, I think, 65 at that point. I used to drive it all the time. That car isn't speeding. He's not swerving trying to hit people. He didn't pop a curb and try and hit pedestrians on a sidewalk. He was driving on an interstate, right? The fact that people decide to walk in the lanes as opposed to being where they're supposed to be, which is not on the interstate, that doesn't mean he was racing through protesters. But that's what we see from the mainstream media. Oh, out of control Jeep races through protesters. And yeah, you're right. The only people injured in that were the bystanders who got shot by one of their own peaceful protesters, right? And that guy, if you watch the other videos, he opens fire after the Jeep is driving away, right? The Jeep has passed them, and he opens fire on that Jeep to try and kill the people inside. Like, imagine that. You're driving down the interstate, you have the right of way, and not only are there people blocking your way, but for the crime of driving down the interstate, they try and kill you. This is out of control. That's what I mean when I say that the Civil War is heating up. I hate to say that, but when you have one side of the argument so callously opening fire against innocent people, right? Something's got to give. And at some point, the people who just want to be left alone in this country are going to start pushing back. Well, and we already saw that in Texas over the weekend, too.
Unfortunately, we don't have the footage ready that I wanted of the vehicle with an already blown tire. I mean, it's pretty obvious something's going on with the tire in advance. My understanding is that some vehicles were being harassed at Alameda and I-225, which is Alameda getting onto the highway. And Alameda is a major road in Aurora. In fact, the municipal courthouse and the Capitol are off of the City Hall, rather, are off of Alameda in Aurora, and that they were essentially being harassed of different cars, multiple cars. And so I'm wondering if they were being harassed first, and then that's like, I'm speeding through because I don't want to be surrounded by this mob. And we may have in a moment footage that we can share of a car being surrounded with what appears to be like a family in the vehicle, and they have to push back because they're completely surrounded because they were going slow trying to get through the crowd.
Yeah, well, that's usually how this starts. And anyone old enough to remember the LA riots, there was a man, his name was Reginald Denny, and he was actually dragged out of his construction truck. He was in a truck. He was dragged out by rioters and killed. Not for doing anything wrong, just for being there, right? So the risk of being mobbed by people and being dragged out of your car and killed is very real. It is in our history. It happens. So most of the times when you see these people allegedly trying to drive through protesters, they're just trying to get home safely. They're just trying to get away. I haven't seen any actual instance of people trying to target these protesters. Most of the time what happens is they're stopped at an intersection, stopped at a light, trying to drive. They're blocked by people. The people start hounding the car, beating on it, and they drive just to try and get away, which again, they have the right of way. You're allowed to escape a mob trying to drag you out of your car.
Yeah, here's some footage in cut 13 of a car that's surrounded. No audio here, but a car that's surrounded, and it is, you're going to see it here in just a moment. So that's actually, I think, from one vantage point where you have there's
Jeep the blue
that's
Jeep
going by, the blue Jeep going by, and then so it's a little later in this clip. In just a moment, you're going to see a bunch of cars that are actually surrounded And Max, that's the thing, that people are not seeing these clips. They just see that highway footage of the Jeep going by, and the media doesn't give them any sort of a complete picture, as we're going to see here right now with these different vehicles. You're going to see a white car surrounded, and there's a lot of bad language, different people shouting and stuff, but then this car with people in it, you can see it starts backing up.
Yeah. Yeah, no. One of the 3 times in my life I've ever had to draw my firearm. I've never had to fire at anyone, but one of the 3 times I actually had to draw my firearm was in Aurora. It was in 2016. I was driving down the road. I had my Trump flag flying from the back of my Jeep, all that stuff. And these teenagers start coming up to the window, banging on the window, chirping at me. So I had to just pull my gun out of the center console just to let them know. I didn't point it at anyone, just to let them know that, hey, maybe you shouldn't try and beat me up, try and drag me out of the car. I mean, it's getting crazy. And we saw this starting in 2016 with Trump supporters being dragged and like beaten just for California, of Trump supporters going to rallies and getting beaten up for leaving, not doing anything wrong, beaten up. And what we've always heard from the left is that it's not a crime to punch a fascist. Well, we've seen that slippery slope go farther and farther down. So they're not even talking about fascists anymore. They're shooting at people driving down the road.
Well, not just
this
that.
isn't punching fascists.
Let's talk as well about what happened in Austin, Texas over the weekend on the subject of fire incidents here. Just our remaining couple of minutes with you, Max McGuire. I know you got to run off and do the Conservative Daily podcast here at the top of the hour. So this is Garrett Foster. And we have here some footage of a shooting incident with a vehicle. But explain to us what happened before we show. Let's show this footage of cut 10 or cut 11 rather, and then we'll have you explain and break it down for what we're seeing. This is from the vantage point of a reporter named Hiram Gilberto. So, Max McGuire, what do we know happened in that incident which resulted in the death of a man named Garrett Foster, a protester?
Really heartbreaking. Anytime there's any loss of life, anytime someone doesn't make it home from one of these things, even if you disagree with them politically, it's heartbreaking. Garrett Foster was there with his quadriplegic, I believe, wife or fiance. Quadriplegic. He was there with his quadriplegic significant other, and he had a rifle. He had an AK-47. Again, it's his right. It's an open carry state. He's allowed to do it. But I believe you have the footage, too, of him earlier in the night getting interviewed and explaining that he had no qualms with using it against someone because the other side is wusses and they're not going to do anything about it. So there was a car that made a legal right on red turn onto a street, and it was legal to do. He tried to navigate in between the protesters who were not obeying any of the Texas code, right? They weren't in a crosswalk. They were just walking through the street, just like we saw on I-225. He makes a turn right to try and get through the protesters. Eventually, they stop him. And what we know is that Garrett Foster approached the car with his rifle, and there's photos on the internet making it look like he had his right arm up, which would illustrate that the rifle is actually being pointed at the car. The driver, who we still don't know what his name is, interpreted that as a threat against his life. That's what he's told police, and he opened fire, shooting Garrett Foster. So it's absolutely tragic, right? He drives away, and then a medic, it's funny, they call him a medic, returned fire and shot the fleeing vehicle 3 times. I mean, you don't really hear many medics shooting cars. But the moral of the story is, like, as tragic as that loss of life was, this ultimately gets filed under play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Mm-hmm. If you are stopping a vehicle that has the right of way, a mob is circling the vehicle, and then the driver sees you approaching it with a rifle pointed at either him or the vehicle, don't act surprised when in Texas, the driver shoots you. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it works.
You mentioned this. This is Garrett Foster in an interview with Hiram Gilberto. Again, that reporter we played just a moment ago, a clip from his live stream. This is the man who was killed who died over the weekend in Austin, Texas. An interview with him.
Tell us a little bit about the gun again. It's AK-47. What you got it out tonight? they don't let us march in the streets anymore, so got to practice some of our rights. Well, man, do you feel like you'll need to use it? Nah, I think I mean, if I use it against the cops, I'm dead. And I think all the people that hate us and, you know, want to say shit to us are too big of a to stop and actually do anything about it. So, why'd you start carrying? Well, our roommate got arrested and they stopped letting us march anywhere, so started carrying.
Basically, the police will kill me, but these other people, they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, they're too big. They're too big of a bunch of wusses to stop me. I mean, it's amazing that theory was disproven that quickly. I mean, you never want to speak ill of the dead.
No.
But for him to actually talk like that and say, yeah, I know I get killed if I used it against a cop, but the other side who's opposing us, they're not going to do anything because they're a bunch of wusses. Within, what, an hour or two, that was proven completely wrong. And it just goes to show, I mean, he's saying that they're not letting us march. That's all we see at night all around the country is marches. They're not forced. Wasn't forced to arm himself to march. He was one of the only people I saw on the live streams that was carrying a gun. I mean, so this notion that I had to do it, listen, he has a right to open carry. He does, but he doesn't have the right to stop a vehicle that is lawfully being operated on a public roadway and to point a gun at the car. I mean, he's a LARPer. He's a live action role player. These people are out there playing military. I mean, we saw it in Louisville, Kentucky, right? There was some kind of march, all African Americans, all armed, and they ended up having a negligent discharge. A guy accidentally shot his shotgun and injured 3 people. Right? These aren't trained marksmen. They're not trained military personnel or trained law enforcement. They're out there LARPing. They're live action role playing. I mean, it's what's happening. I mean, we saw footage from another rally a couple weeks ago where a guy has a gun, and not only is it actually a 22 caliber model, so it wouldn't actually be extremely dangerous, but it was jammed, and he's marching through the street all proudly. I mean, these aren't well-trained people, and we see that the fact that they're shooting cars that are driving down the road, that they're shooting innocent people by accident. I mean, this is getting dangerous.
Reports are saying that the incident in Louisville was with a member of the Not Effing Around Coalition. Yep. That's the name of this militia. It's a black militia group, I guess. And apparently he was not being a responsible firearms owner amidst other militia members, which is rather interesting to me. But in terms of Garrett Foster and the different incidences that we're seeing here, one thing that was so striking to me, last Sunday, I was at the Pro-Police Rally, Colorado. As you know, we did a lot of coverage here on Jimmy at the Crossroads about that. And I know, and you know, that there were a heck of a lot of concealed carry holders who were armed at that time, but nobody pulled a firearm, nobody fired it, even though they would have been, some of them would have been well within their rights to take either of those courses of action. They showed restraint. We're not seeing that kind of restraint shown by these people out claiming to be protesters who show up with firearms and are clearly willing to use them and even hit other protesters in the process when they completely miss their target.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the start, I think a lot of this boils down to they truly believe that the prosecutors have their back. I mean, I talked to a bunch of people who were at the Denver pro-police rally, and I talked to them. They had concealed weapons. One of the reasons that they didn't even draw is because they saw what's going on in St. Louis with the McCloskeys. They defended their home. The law explicitly gives them the right to defend their home, and they're still being prosecuted. And the prosecutor is fabricating the evidence to try and get a conviction. The firearm, one of the firearms that they actually confiscated, was not operable in St. Louis, and they basically took it apart, put it back together to make it operable so they could charge her. So people at the Denver rally that I talked to, they had guns, but they didn't trust the system to actually have their back. I mean, you've covered it. The police were given a stand down order from politicians, right? Does anyone really think that if they were to draw their guns and shoot someone whacking them with a skateboard, that they would have got justice? No, right? They would have made an example out of them. And I think that's what you're seeing around the country too, where people in these protests, the left side protests, they are so empowered because they truly believe that nothing will happen to them. They truly believe it. They believe that the prosecutors are on their side and that they won't be held accountable for their actions. Meanwhile, law-abiding citizens who just want to be left alone, in the back of their mind, they're looking at the McCloskey's case and saying, oh man, if I actually have to even just draw my weapon, I'm going to face federal felony charges, right? That's always in the back of your head, no matter what, after seeing this. So I think that's one of the big contributing factors.
Well, one of the things, so, I mean, and I've been talking about this in the context of Denver, is that these the people perpetrating this violence, they are thugs. They are not genuine protesters, as we were talking about, peaceful protesters. They're not them. They're engaging and willing to engage in this type of violence. Well, I was talking about all last week how brazen they've become to actually attack and get away with it, which is what they knew they would, to attack a gathering of law-abiding citizens at a permitted rally that is an annual event. But also, they are so willing to do, let's put up, if we have a cut 9 here, if you have some of that, Nathan Matoush, we don't need the volume, we could just use it as B-roll, but we had in Aurora, Colorado, which shows that it is spreading across the country. People are talking about Seattle, they're talking about Portland, they're talking about Chicago and New York City, and all important to talk about those big cities. But then you have a place like Aurora, Colorado, which just on Saturday night, after that Jeep incident we were talking about, and using that as an excuse, they were busting up the municipal court in Aurora, Colorado, and other things in that area with abandon. They are brazen and heavily emboldened, Max McGuire.
They are. And if that's their response to a motorist legally driving down a public roadway at the speed limit, right? If that's their response, like a Jeep drove down I-225 at the speed limit and didn't hit anyone, if their response to that is to ransack the courthouse, what do you think is going to happen if the police actually crack down on them? I mean, we're seeing it in Portland, right? Officers are having fireworks shot at them. That's not an innocent thing. When you shoot a firework at an officer, you are using explosive as a weapon. That brings the National Firearms Act of 1934 into effect, because that becomes a destructive device trying to use it as a weapon. And the laws dealing with that are the same laws that would criminalize the illegal possession of a machine gun. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. When people are throwing fireworks, explosives, improvised explosives at officers, the laws at work are the same laws that would punish them for using a rocket launcher or using a machine gun or using a sawed-off shotgun. These are serious, serious crimes. And to see Democrats in Congress wanting to defund DHS and DOJ to try and put a stop to Operation Legend and the other things that Trump is doing to try and put a stop to this, it's really shameful, because what you see from Democrat politicians across the country is that they're okay with the status quo if it means stopping Trump from getting a victory, that they're okay with what you're seeing in these cities, the violence, people getting killed. They're okay with it because they want to win the election in November. And they think that they can do that by denying Trump a victory. They're politicizing people's lives and livelihoods and the safety of their cities. It's absolutely shameful. And what you're seeing all across this country, as I said, is the result of these children being allowed to do this for months on end.
Yeah, and I think children, and petulant children at that, is the right descriptor. I mean, even at this rally last Sunday, I was pointing this out, they were blowing bubbles. I mean, who blows bubbles while they're also beating people up? But petulant kids who are ready and willing to engage in, abusing other people, trying to be bullies. And something else, too, they're stopping and redirecting traffic. Like, literally, that was happening in Aurora. I saw a video of that where cars were coming around and they were told, you have to turn around. Who are these people to say that they get to control traffic?
When the lockdown protesters in Denver, what was it, back in March or April, when they had that drive-through protest, they were criticized for blocking an ambulance. Like, where is that kind of line of criticism for all of these?
When they could only be in their cars at the time, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, they were told, you can only be in your car. You cannot be outside. Please don't be outside. So they made it in cars. It was a different circumstance.
It's funny how you never hear that line, though. You never hear them accuse the BLM protesters of blocking ambulances. You never hear it.
It's true. So, Max McGuire, real quick final question. Where do we go from here, do you think, especially as President Trump and his administration are trying to bring back some semblance of control here in this country? Or law and order.
Well, where you go from here is if you are legally allowed to and you don't already, you should buy a firearm. You should receive training in that firearm. You should become comfortable with the use of that firearm, and you should have that firearm on you when you're at home, or if you want, get a concealed carry permit wherever you live, because this is going to get worse before it gets better. And when police are being given stand down orders and told not to defend you when you're being attacked, the only person left to defend you is yourself. So I'm not giving out a call to vigilantism, but you are your best defender, and you cannot rely on the police. It's not the officers. The officers want to do good work. It's the politicized top brass, and it's the politicians ordering them to stand down. So where we go from here, unfortunately, we're in a part in America, in our history, where you need to arm yourself. You need to learn how to use a firearm and be ready to if need be.
Well, it is pretty clear that you cannot, for one reason or another, you cannot count on the police. Not that you, in certain situations, can always count on the police anyway, but now more than ever, you do need to be able to say, yes, I can take my own personal safety in my own hands.
Yeah. So yeah, you do. There's a famous court case from Castle Rock, Gonzalez v. Castle Rock, that went all the way to the Supreme Court, that found that the police do not have an obligation, a constitutional obligation to protect you. Their role is to protect society as a whole. And if to do that, they need to ignore your plights, they can. So, I mean, it's well documented. You need to be able to defend yourself.
Max McGuire, host of the Conservative Daily podcast, streaming live in about an hour. Be sure to check it out, Facebook and YouTube, and also advocacy director, conservative-daily.com. Always good to check in with you, my friend. Thanks for the time today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Once again, Max McGuire joining us from Conservative Daily. Check out the Conservative Daily podcast. Always entertaining, engaging, provocative, and thought-provoking. So I want to give a couple of quick thoughts, and then we're going to wrap up today. Tomorrow, so we've got quite a show tomorrow. We are planning to have on Mayor Mike Coffman of Aurora, Colorado, which we were just talking about Aurora, which is my city, so he's my mayor. But it's the third largest city in Colorado, and it has been facing this chaos that we have seen sweeping across the country. I'll talk more about it in just a moment. But tomorrow we will have Mayor Coffman on the program. We will also have Lieutenant Steve Rogers, retired police lieutenant from New Jersey, also former military intel guy, and he is was on the Joint Counterterrorism Task Force. So it's going to be very interesting to hear what he has to say about all that's going on. Plus, U.S. Senator Cory Gardner will join us tomorrow as well here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So we've got quite a jam-packed show. We've had to make some scheduling changes today and putting a few things into place for tomorrow. So we will have a lengthier, more action-packed show tomorrow here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But I want to just show you a little bit of what we were talking about in terms of some of the chaos in Aurora, Colorado on Saturday night. Now, this is a big city in the sense that it covers a lot of land and has a sizable population. And, there are some more suburban parts of Aurora. There are more urban parts of Aurora. This is more urban. This is what we're seeing is from downtown Aurora near the municipal courthouse, which they absolutely went ahead and ransacked. Now, the image that we're seeing there, that's Elijah Mclean. A year ago in August, Elijah Mclean died while in police custody. That is one of the big precipitators of some of this. At least it's being used. His death is being used by the chaotic instigators and vandals and attackers in Colorado as justification for this violence, for what we've been seeing in the mayhem. And it really is shocking to see the kind of things that they're engaged in. But these events, including the rally disruption last Sunday, the primary organization responsible for organizing these events is a group known as the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The Party for Socialism and Liberation. And by the way, 2 members of the Aurora City Council, Juan Marcano and Allison Coombs, are members of, and I believe in the case of Marcano, one of the leaders of this group. And they are on the Aurora City Council. I want to show you so you can see the brazenness. This is what's spreading across the country. Everybody's focusing, rightly, understandably so, on what's happening in Portland. Aurora, Colorado is not Portland. In fact, one of the things we'll talk with Mayor Mike Kaufman about tomorrow is how he does not want Aurora to become like Portland. But there's all this attention being focused on Portland, Seattle, and elsewhere, but we're seeing this kind of chaos happen in other parts of the country, like Colorado, which is a big reason why we're focusing, not just because I'm here, but because it is an example of a surprising example for many of what we are seeing in this country right now. So here is some footage of the intensity of Saturday night, and let's have the volume up on this one, please, Mr. Matoush. And you can hear and see what was going on at the municipal courthouse in Aurora, Colorado, and nearby. They are breaking glass, destroying windows. What they did was they pulled down plywood that was covering, protecting the windows of the municipal courthouse in Aurora, Colorado.
Your fence didn't work, you
And in a moment, you're going to see some footage. And by the way, the police did nothing here. The police were staying back. They didn't take any action. They threatened arrest. They threatened to use pepper spray. They didn't. One of the things that they were yelling, too, was shields to the front, shields to the front. They were using plywood that they had taken down from the buildings as shields, even as they were uninterrupted by police. And I saw in Aurora video of these so-called protesters directing traffic and turning cars around. We will show footage of this tomorrow. Turning cars around. That's happening in these parts of the country where they feel like they can do whatever they want and direct people and have cars leave. Let's show cut 13 one more time, Nathan Matoush, again, producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, where you can see this car being redirected, pushed back by people on the highway who are just, this is why a car can't get through going slowly by if they want to go by on the highway when you have this complete disruption in the middle of a Saturday afternoon and evening. Look at that. Who the hell do these people think they are across the country doing this? And the less the police act, like at the rally or like at the Denver rally we've talked about, or like what we saw in Aurora, Colorado on Saturday night with the chaos and the vandalism and the destruction, the less the police act to respond to those incidents, the more emboldened they feel and the more brazen they will get. We are seeing an overcorrection of police. They've gone too far in certain circumstances. We have seen that with our very eyes, sure. But at the same time, police need to do their jobs and not be held back by authorities, the brass, who are unwilling to let them do their jobs. You need to hold officers that stray to account. That needs to happen. In Aurora, Colorado, the police department has not done an adequate job of that. It's understandable then, on one level, that it's harder for some people to trust the police when other excesses have not been reined in. But at the same time, an overcorrection to the point of a hands-off attitude and letting them just do this unabated is horrendous. And that's what the brass is doing wrong, allowing people like last Sunday to be beaten, attacked, just as they were trying to play music and speak and gather together. This is an express violation of a lawsuit. I believe that a lawsuit has been filed or is being filed today in Colorado regarding this rally by rally organizers and participants against the city for a failure, the city of Denver, for a failure to protect a lawful assembly and to protect speech. Literally, this was preventing citizens from exercising their right to speak. And that is in violation of statute, state and city statute. And so that's why there's a lawsuit. And I think appropriately so. Randy Corcoran, who was on this show last week, I believe he's spearheading that lawsuit. And I think it's one that is absolutely essential and probably should be happening in a heck of a lot of places around the country where businesses have been destroyed, livelihoods ruined. Someone I know was just in Portland a couple weeks ago and actually, went downtown in Portland to take a look and go to some restaurant there during the day. And he noticed a restaurant there, an Asian restaurant, that had a note on either the door or the window saying, "Please don't break my heart." Because that's what we're seeing. One final thing that I want to make a point about today is that these people, these thugs that are destroying property and beating on people too, they don't care in particular about the idea of property rights. We were showing footage of Aurora, Colorado, and the brazenness and chaos and mayhem on Saturday. The footage we showed, we could put it up again, please, Nathan. The brazenness here was captured on camera by Sentinel reporter, it's a publication in Colorado, Sentinel reporter Quincy Snowden. And one of the things that he reported is that intermixed with shouts of Elijah Mclean, which is their cover story for these riots, their supposed excuse for destroying property, they also said F property, F property, F property. Because they don't care about private property rights. The Party for Socialism and Liberation put on this chaos. They're responsible for this event on Saturday. And that group, being socialists, being Marxists, literally do not care about private property. They believe private property is a scourge that must be done away with. I was looking at their website last night. They truly believe this. The moment that American society begins to accept the idea that property is not important to protect is the moment we lose the essence of this country. It's not just about being able to do things. Your right to property is fundamental to being a human being. You earn something, it is yours. You work hard for something, it is yours. And you have a property in you as a person. Property rights are important because it means that you have control over yourself and your own life. It's not just the right to life, the right to property is fundamental. And these thugs do not give a damn about private property, about property of any kind, public property. We were seeing the destruction of the Aurora Municipal Court there. We've seen this all across the country. And people say, oh, well, property is less important than lives, and we need to be worried about lives being lost at the hands of police. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, people. There is absolutely nothing that says that you cannot be working hard to make changes that will help protect lives while also not destroying property. There are a lot of ways to be effective in getting your message across short of destroying property. Destroying things that do not belong to you. I saw someone on Twitter in response to me tweeting about this F property incident. Someone on Twitter tweeted back and said, you know, I wonder if maybe somebody would go in there, take all their cell phones, all their smartphones, and give them a thing of sticky notes with F property written right on top of it. They'd probably be pretty pissed off in that moment when their smartphones are taken away and they're told F property. That's the experience of Lo Becker, the band leader at Pro Police Rally Colorado last Sunday, July 19th, and we have footage of this actually, when one of these so-called protesters, these Antifa socialist thugs that attacked and ransacked our event, knocked down the microphone that I was using, and along with it, knocked down an iPad. And that iPad was crushed. Property belonging to band leader Lo Becker. Decimated because of this attack. But they don't care about property. You saw it knocked down right there by that woman. Drum set damaged. Guitar damaged. Other equipment damaged. They don't care about what belongs to you as another person. If it's in their way, they will destroy it. That's what we're up against. And it's because, more than anything, it's rooted in an ideology that doesn't believe private property should exist. And it's stunning, too, because a municipal court is also public property. It's not even private property. But their real goal is the eradication of private property and private property rights. And that is abundantly clear, more and more. And that's why we need this situation to get under control around the country. Because it is ingraining in people's minds a lesson that is fundamentally un-American and anti-American. We fought a Cold War against communist regimes and won it because we understood the value of human freedom, including when it comes to property rights and free markets. They don't. Or if they do, they don't care because they want to get rid of it. It is an agenda, folks, and it has nothing to do. None of this violence now that we're seeing, any of these violent incidents, they have nothing to do with George Floyd or Elijah Mclean or anybody else who has died because of police officers. It is now simply about a radical agenda. I've seen some peaceful protest instances. Max McGuire was saying he didn't see any. I've seen some. But they are increasingly, it seems, few and far between, with the hostility building up, chaos, mayhem, and violence building up. And we all need to watch out for that and be ready to protect ourselves, because we can't rely upon others, even the police, to step in, particularly because of how politicized they have become. Well, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. My thanks to Max McGuire for joining us, producer extraordinaire Nathan Matouche, and, of course, our partners at the Washington Examiner. Tomorrow, we will have on Mayor Mike Kaufman of Aurora, Colorado. Talk about what's going on here and what it can portend for the rest of the country. We'll talk with Lieutenant Steve Rogers, retired police lieutenant, about all the chaos, and U.S. Senator Cory Gardner. Don't miss a beat. Jimmy at the Crossroads tomorrow. Tune in then. Stay well, stay healthy, stay safe and sound. We'll see you next time. For now, God bless America.